A passenger leaned forward and gently tapped the woman's shoulder, his voice polite but firm as he said, "Excuse me, your seat is reclined." The words pulled her out of her thoughts like a sudden jolt. Flustered, she reached for the button and straightened the seat, murmuring a quick apology without fully turning around. A faint warmth rushed into her cheeks, the kind that comes from unwanted attention in a quiet place. Around them, the cabin hummed with the steady drone of engines and soft murmurs of conversation, the ordinary soundtrack of a routine flight that promised nothing more than a safe arrival. She tried to settle back into her own space, folding her hands in her lap as if that might erase the awkward moment. Outside the oval window, clouds stretched like an endless white ocean under the afternoon sun. Normally, she loved watching the imagining distant places and fresh beginnings, but now her mind replayed the brief exchange again and again. It wasn't anger she felt, only a strange restlessness, as though something unseen had shifted. The cabin lights flickered slightly before stabilizing, subtle enough that most passengers didn't notice, but she did, her eyes lifting instinctively toward the ceiling panels. Across the aisle, a flight attendant pushed a service cart forward, smiling with practiced warmth while offering drinks and packaged snacks. The woman accepted a cup of water, grateful for something to occupy her hands. The cool plastic pressed against her palms grounded her, easing the tension she hadn't realized she carried. Children whispered excitedly 2 rows back, a businessman typed furiously on his laptop, and an elderly couple shared a quiet joke. It was a picture of normalcy so complete that no one could have guessed how fragile it really was, like calm water hiding a powerful current beneath. She glanced over her shoulder briefly at the man who had spoken to her. He had already returned to his book, his expression neutral, as if the moment had never happened. That, somehow, made her feel better. People corrected small inconveniences on flights all the time. It meant nothing. Still, a faint unease lingered in her chest, the kind that had no clear cause. She shifted in her seat, listening more carefully to the sounds around her. The engine's pitch, the subtle vibration under her feet, the distant clink of cups against the cart. Minutes passed, slow and uneventful. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that the air itself had grown heavier. The seatbelt sign chimed on with a soft ding, and a gentle announcement requested passengers to remain seated due to expected turbulence. A ripple of mild annoyance moved through the cabin as people adjusted their positions and secured their belts. She obeyed automatically, pulling the strap tight across her lap. Outside, the clouds had thickened into towering grey formations, their soft edges now sharp and imposing like silent mountains. The first jolt came without warning, a sudden drop that pulled startled gasps from several passengers. Her fingers tightened around the armrest, knuckles paling as the plane steadied again. Nervous laughter bubbled up in pockets, people reassuring one. Another that turbulence was normal. She tried to smile, but her heartbeat had quickened, each thud echoing in her ears. The overhead bins rattled faintly, and somewhere a glass clinked against plastic. The flight attendants moved briskly now, securing items with focused expressions that betrayed a hint of urgency. Another shudder rolled through the aircraft, stronger this time, followed by a strange silence in which even the engines seemed to hold their breath. She closed her eyes for a moment, inhaling slowly, willing herself to stay calm. Flying had never frightened her before, but this felt different, less like bumps in the sky and more like the plane was struggling against an invisible force. When she opened her eyes again, she noticed other passengers exchanging uncertain glances, their earlier ease replaced by quiet concern. A child began to cry softly, the sound thin and trembling against the backdrop of mechanical noise. His mother whispered soothing words, though her own voice wavered. The woman found herself leaning slightly into the aisle, watching the crew member's face. S for clues. Professionals, she reminded herself. They knew what they were doing, yet even as she thought it, she saw one attendant grip the back of a seat a little too tightly, her smile fixed but strained. The realization sent a cold thread of fear down her spine. The man behind her shifted forward suddenly, as if about to speak again, but stopped himself. She wondered if he regretted mentioning the seat at all, if he sensed the tension now filling the cabin. The plane dipped once, more, a longer, deeper motion that left her stomach floating uncomfortably. This time, no one laughed. Conversations faded into a hush, broken only by the low roar of engines and the occasional creak of metal. She swallowed, her mouth dry, wishing she had accepted juice instead of water. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, the shaking eased, the aircraft leveled, gliding through the clouds with cautious steadiness. A collective exhale moved through the cabin, relief softening rigid shoulders and anxious expressions. She leaned back carefully, suddenly aware of how tired her body felt from the tension. For a moment, she closed her eyes again, letting the calm wash over her. She had no way of knowing that this brief stillness was only the pause before something far more serious would unfold, a turning point that would transform an ordinary flight into a story no one on board would ever forget. The calm that had settled over the cabin shattered when a sharp alarm echoed from somewhere beyond the in-cockpit door. Flight attendants froze mid-step, their composed expressions replaced by alert focus. A strained announcement followed, the captain's voice tight as he informed passengers of a technical issue requiring immediate precautions. Oxygen masks did not deploy, but the tension was enough to drain color from every face. The woman fee. Ilti, her pulse steady instead of race, a strange clarity washing over her. Training she had tried to forget surged forward, each memory snapping into place as she unbuckled her belt with quiet determination. A nearby attendant noticed her standing and hurried over, urging her to sit down, but the woman spoke quickly, her tone calm and precise. She revealed her background as an aviation systems specialist, recently off duty and traveling home. The attendant hesitated only a second before signaling to a colleague, desperation outweighing protocol. Moments later, she was escorted toward the cockpit, the narrow aisle seeming longer than before. Passengers watched with wide, questioning eyes, sensing something significant unfolding. The man who had earlier spoken about her seat leaned back to let her pass, confusion written across his face. Inside the cockpit, controlled chaos reigned. Warning lights blinked in urgent patterns across the instrument panels, casting red reflections on the pilots' strained faces. One system had failed, then another, triggering a cascade that threatened the aircraft's stability. The captain glanced back as she entered, skepticism flickering before urgency took over. She introduced herself quickly and moved closer, scanning the displays with practiced eyes. Years of experience allowed her to filter the noise and identify the root of the malfunction, a rare fault that required a precise manual override procedure few remembered under pressure. Her voice cut through the tension, steady and authoritative, as she instructed the co-pilot to adjust specific controls. The cockpit responded with a series of mechanical clicks, the aircraft shuddering as systems attempted to recalibrate. Outside, clouds swirled like a storm determined to test their resolve. She guided them step by step, translating complex diagnostics into clear actions, her mind working faster than fear could follow. Slowly, one warning light faded, then another, each small victory restoring a fragment of control. The captain's rigid posture eased slightly, hope replacing the earlier dread. Back in the cabin, passengers clung to armrests and whispered prayers, unaware of the precise battle being fought just meters away. The flight attendants moved among them with reassuring smiles, though their yes flicked repeatedly toward the cockpit door. Minutes stretched unbearably long until the plane's violent tremors softened into manageable vibrations. Some passengers noticed the change and dared to breathe again. The man who had tapped her shoulder earlier stared ahead silently, replaying their brief interaction with a growing sense of disbelief at how quickly ordinary moments could become extraordinary. In the cockpit, the final step remained, a delicate maneuver to stabilize altitude and prepare for an emergency landing. She explained the sequence carefully, emphasizing timing and coordination. The pilots followed her lead, hands steady despite the weight of hundreds of lives depending on the Bravery. As the aircraft responded, its movements grew smoother, more obedient, like a wild force finally brought under control. Air traffic control cleared a priority landing, their voices crackling with urgency through the radio. A runway awaited, long and open, a narrow path between disaster and survival. The descent felt endless, the ground slowly rising to meet them through breaks in the cloud cover. The woman monitored every gauge, ready to correct even the slightest deviation. The captain announced the landing attempt, his voice steadier now, strengthened by the knowledge that they were no longer alone in the fight. Wheels extended with a heavy thud, locking into place as the aircraft aligned with the runway. For a suspended moment, time seemed to hold its breath along with everyone on board. When the tires finally touched the ground, the impact sent a jolt through the cabin, followed by a roar of friction and reversed thrust. Passengers cried out, then erupted into relieved sobs and applause as the plane slowed. The woman remained focused until the aircraft rolled to a complete stop, every system stable at last. Only then did her shoulders sag with exhaustion, the adrenaline that had carried her now draining away. The captain turned to her, gratitude shining in his eyes, words failing to capture the magnitude of what she had done. As the doors opened, and fresh air rushed inside, reality returned in a wave of disbelief and relief. Passengers began to understand that they had come dangerously close to tragedy. The woman stepped back into the aisle quietly, hoping to disappear into the crowd, but it was impossible. Faces turned toward her, whispers spreading like ripples across water. Some reached out to touch her hand as she passed, silent thank yous conveyed through trembling smiles and tear-filled eyes. The man who had earlier complained about her seat stood as she approached, his expression transformed from mild irritation to profound respect. For a moment, he seemed unable to speak, overwhelmed by the realization of who she was and what she had done. Finally, he managed a quiet whisper, his voice thick with emotion. "Ma'am, you just saved 300 lives." She met his gaze with a gentle, tired smile, shaking her head slightly, as if to say she had only done what anyone should. Stepping out of the aircraft, she paused on the stairs and looked back once, the enormity of experience settling over her like a delayed storm. Sirens wailed in the distance, emergency crews surrounding the plane in flashing lights. Above, the sky had cleared into a calm blue, as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. She inhaled deeply, grateful for the simple act of breathing, for the chance given to everyone on board. Then she walked forward into the waiting crowd, carrying with her the quiet knowledge that an ordinary journey had turned into a moment that would define countless lives forever.